Today we are going to continue the hearing on Senate Bill 288. We're going to focus on the neutral testimony, and we have David Herndon with the Bank Commissioner's Office here. David, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you. Chairman Longbine, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear as a neutral conferee on SB 288. My name is David Herndon, and it is my good fortune to serve as the Kansas State Bank Commissioner. Early this session, Representative Owens and members of the Beneficence executive team met with me and my staff about their proposal. We've continued to meet and resolved many issues, answered questions, raised concerns regarding this bill. We appreciate the time they took to explain to us their unique business concept and to involve us up front with this legislation. We also look forward to having conversations as we continue our due diligence and conversations with the Commerce Department, the Governor's Office, the Lieutenant Governor's Office, any other stakeholders, and of course this body regarding this bill. Today, we are neutral on SB 288, as our office respects the fact that we do not decide legislation, you do. If called upon, we will regulate this new entity, originally called a Technology-Enabled Trust Bank, but since renamed to a Technology-Enabled Fiduciary Financial Institution, or TEFI. But that regulation will require new, non-traditional, and as yet unestablished regulatory processes. So we say to this legislature and go on record saying that we still have some unresolved concerns. Notably, we are concerned about the following. First, as you've heard, the business model used by TEFI is unique and novel, not only for the state of Kansas, but also nationally. Neither our office nor others in the bank and trust regulatory industry that we have consulted fully understand the business model used here. Therefore, we cannot make conclusions as to the likely success or failure of this entity, and that equates to a reputation risk to Kansas and to our office. Second, the entity's lending practice relies on alternative assets as loan collateral, which you've read and heard yesterday's testimony, consist of such assets as venture capital funds, private equity funds, private real estate funds, etc., all of which are defined as illiquid, therefore generally considered volatile or unstable. As you've also heard, these types of loans are non-bankable, so we understand the desire and support to open this market. But because the OSBC is not accustomed to examining these types of assets, there is no historical reliable data that demonstrates the expected cash flow levels, debt service availability, and other repayment sources identified by these assets. We learned in our conversation with Beneficent the repayment structure on the typical loan is a material departure from traditional bank loan structuring. Here, the typical loan repayment structure requires all principal and accrued interest becoming due at maturity, and maturity that easily exceeds 10 years. Generally, bank loans require a periodic interest payment and an amortization of principal throughout the life of the loan. This departure from the normal loan structure is significant in our opinion. Third, the bill does not allow the OSBC to review the profitability of the TEFI during examination. This is in Section 7C. It is our position that an entity cannot be successful without generating profit, and that profitability assessment is a necessary component to any regulatory examination. Furthermore, the bill creates additional exceptions to our traditional industry standard examination procedures for financial institutions. It appears that Section 10 provides departures from the standard formulas for financial metrics, capital requirements, solvency definitions, concentration risks, usury rates, and unusually high compensation. Conflict of interest standards seem to be modified, and an exception to GAAP is included in Section 11, subsection G. All these items pose significant obstacles to the ability of our office, the Office of State Bank Commissioner, to conduct a proper safety and soundness examination. Or, OSBC has not yet had the opportunity to review Beneficient's corporate structure or financial statements, its subsidiaries, or its affiliates. We have, however, attempted to review publicly available ratings reports. We searched 8. 6 firms reported ratings not available. 1 reported non-opinion. But the one that we did use reflects our concerns. Again, we have not been provided a corporate diagram structure, but we believe that GWG Holdings, Inc., a publicly traded company, is at least an affiliate of the proponent, perhaps even a parent company. Citing a February 19, 2021 Charles Schwab Equity Ratings Report, GWG is graded F, strongly underperforming is the definition, on a scale of A to F. Naturally, we hope that our review of the proponent's financials allay our concerns. The strength of a parent company is critically important if it's needed for additional capital and/or financial support in any entity. Again, we hope a review of the corporate structure and the financial statement allays our fears about that. 5, and finally, the entity is not FDIC insured, nor can it be insured, because it does not accept deposits. No federal charter is being sought, so no federal regulator is contemplated. Unless another state agency or department, i.e. the Commerce Department, the Securities Commissioner, 100% of the regulatory obligation falls to OSBC. If the entity fails, will any other entity be around to step in to take over the operation? Does OSB have any authority to close or to resolve issues like we do with troubled and failing banks? The first TEFI will be a pilot program before other TEFIs are allowed in the state. To us, this approach indicates an experimental concept which raises concerns for any financial regulator where conservative, prudent measures are generally followed, and it most certainly accents the reputation risk to Kansas and to the OSBC. To be clear, OSB understands and absolutely supports the economic development benefits delivered to Kansas by TEFIs. We intend and hope to continue our discussions with the proponents and complete our due diligence. But until that due diligence is completed, OSBC is not in a position to regulate nor examine this entity as proposed, nor is in a position to recommend to the State Banking Board issuance or denial of a full charter. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the comments and the consideration of the committee for my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Herndon. Committee, are there questions? I have a couple. You talked a couple of times about reputational risk, which is certainly a concern, but I didn't hear any conversation of financial risk to the state. In my due diligence, I haven't been able to find any. Have you?
No, sir, we have not found any financial responsibility to the state. There are no state funds committed, as we understand, or therefore at risk.
And the second thing in your comments, it appears that you have concerns about I don't know, the learning curve or the lack of knowledge within the OSBC of this type of trust arrangement. Do you feel like you could gain that knowledge through the pilot program? I think that's why the pilot program was established.
Yes, sir. As I said, we will figure out a way to regulate this however it comes out. Yesterday, the presentation included the 2 roadways, the traditional and the new one. I think the OSBC is charged with holding the road under construction signs for the new one, and we are absolutely willing to do that. But we have to create the model. The model isn't out there, and we have to create it, and we have to create it correctly.
As I also understand, there's a significant amount of money being sent to the commissioner's office to help you with hiring consultants or hiring additional people. Is that?
That is correct. There is a significant sum of money available to us to help build this process, and we intend to utilize that.
Any additional questions, Senator Pittman?
Yeah, Mr. Aaron, thanks for being here, and thanks for the testimony, and thanks for your honest appraisal of your opinion on this piece. Can you explore the conflict of interest piece on GAP that you mentioned? Can you explain a little bit more about what your concern is on that side?
Conflict, there's actually two parts to my answer. The conflict of interest part specifically, a great deal one is on the forms issue, where our office is expected to approve forms, and that would create a very large conflict of interest. We can opine on somebody else's forms, but to create the forms and then examine those forms would create a huge conflict of interest. GAP principles on the profitability, examinations typically review capital adequacy, asset quality, management, earnings, liquidity, and interest rate sensitivity. As far as the not including profitability, that's the earnings component, a key part of the overall strength. There is also the definition of solvency that allows for the inclusion of intangible assets. We think that intangible assets should not be included as a key component of solvency.
And our understanding is that intangible assets are a big part of what they're borrowing off of, right?
Yes, that's part of the loan portfolio is, as we understand it, exclusively intangible assets. But the balance sheet also includes, or has the potential, because it says intangible assets of any type. So that could also include items such as goodwill. We understand that there's some proprietary software used. That could be an intangible asset, and things like that outside of the loan portfolio.
And then on the forms issue, is that the forms and the approval of the forms, that's being directed to OSBC to do that?
Yes, sir.
I see. And what would be the normal way of doing that then?
Using a third-party provider that would generate the forms subject to the appropriate laws, either federal or state or both. And then we would see those, but as far as drafting or approving those forms, that's where the conflict of interest is created in our view.
Thanks. We could probably fix that, it sounds like, though, right? That might have been an oversight, or is that something that's critical?
I'm not certain that I understand your question. As it appears in the bill, it says it falls to us, so it would need to be fixed.
Right. So we could fix that. I'm saying it's not a critical aspect of the bill. That probably was, somebody just chose that and didn't really necessarily think through that, I would imagine. Okay, thank you.
Any other additional questions for the bank commissioner? Seeing none, Mr. Herndon, thank you very much. We will now turn to Alex Orrell, Senior Vice President with Kansas Bankers Association. Welcome, Alex.
Good morning, committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Mr. Chairman. Since this will be my last time testifying before you this year, I do want to thank the committee's work this year on some serious legislation, and thank you for the support on many of those pieces, too. We do appreciate that. I am Alex Orrell, testifying on behalf of the Kansas Bankers Association to provide neutral testimony on Senate Bill 288. We appreciate the committee's work on looking at any economic development initiatives that can help our Kansans, specifically in rural Kansas. We were first approached about this concept back in early December, or around Christmas time, from the proponents of this legislation. And since that time, we have had many, many Zoom meetings, calls, in-person meetings that have lasted hours. And we've had meetings with members of the legislature, members of our trust division, which just celebrated their 100-year anniversary last year, as well as national trust experts with the American Bankers Association, and finally with the KBA State Affairs Committee, which is comprised of almost 40 bankers across the state that directs our policy and what we push for here in the Kansas State House. So we have done a lot of research, and I commend the proponents' efforts and time that they took to educate not only myself, but our team and our membership. It is a very complex issue, but they have gone above and beyond in answering every single question that we have had, so I appreciate their work. We really had three overarching questions with the legislation from the proponents. First, it started with how would TEFIs, because I'm going to use the term that we've agreed to, how do they compete with Kansas banks and trust companies? If they do compete, how do they compete on a level playing field? That's something we push for in everything up here. You all know that. We have concluded that they do not compete with Kansas banks or Kansas trust companies. It's creating a whole new lane of financial service in this state that could even be complementary. If there's economic development going on in this state, specifically in the rural areas, those deposits will have to go in Kansas banks, as well as economic development activity across the state is also good for banks. We're only as successful as the communities we serve. We've stated that to you many, many times before. Would TEFIs disrupt the current Kansas Bank and Trust Company business model? We've concluded that it would not disrupt our current business model. And finally, the original term TETB, term trust bank, they can offer services that traditional Kansas banks and Kansas trust companies can't do. So why would you use the term trust bank if you're able to do things that trust and banks are not able to do? There was nothing sinister with the idea of that one, that idea of trust bank. Ben is a trust company at its core, and they do lending. So trust bank made sense. But we did have concerns with the possibility of confusion among potential customers and reputational risk as well, because you're able to do things differently than we are. They understood those concerns and worked with us on those concerns and agreed to a mutual agreed name of technology-enabled fiduciary financial institution, which we are comfortable with. In conclusion, we do not believe this directly impacts the banking or trust business model. We do not compete with us on an unlevel playing field. Frankly, could be complementary if it is successful. So we appreciate this committee's work. We do believe it merits a discussion of this committee and this legislature on this issue. But we stand before you today neutral, and I'll be willing to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Alex, thank you very much. Committee, are there questions of Alex? Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex, thank you for your testimony. You said it could be complementary to the current banking system. Yes. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more on how that would work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or so you see it as a vision working?
I also do want to say I do appreciate answering questions forward, not back. I had Senator Gossage at my back many times. So complementary, yes. They're going to have to place their deposits if these economic growth zones receive that 2.5% residual. Accounting to, I think their estimates are 9 million to 12 million, varies. But those monies are going to have to go into these foundations, these local economic growth zones. Those economic growth zones are going to have to put those monies somewhere. They're not going to be able to hold them. So they're going to have to be put into Kansas banks, which could grow deposits for Kansas financial institutions. Specifically in the rural areas, and something we mentioned regarding Senate Bill 15 earlier this year, is concern of Kansas bank charters across the state. We lost 100 over the last 10 years. Very concerning. This proposal could help provide economic activity in those rural communities where we are losing Kansas banks. So it could be complementary to helping provide economic activity in those areas where there is none right now.
Additional questions? See none. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone else that would like to testify neutral or opponent on Senate Bill 288? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 288. Committee, at this point, I'd like to work Senate Bill 288. Is there a motion on the bill? Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion that we work Senate Bill 288.
Seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, committee, I do have a balloon that has been provided to me. Suzanne, can you pass it out? David, could you explain this balloon to us? It's the one that has the name change in it on page 3.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Yeah, if you look at the balloon, page 3 is the First Amendment. It's in the definitional section. Striking technology-enabled trust bank, inserting fiduciary financial institution, the TEFI, as was indicated during the hearing. And then we have just a box there that say that all references to trust bank in Senate Bill 288 would be replaced with the fiduciary financial institution. So if you look through the bill and you see instances of trust bank, think fiduciary financial institution. It's kind of an overarching amendment there on page 3. The next amendment is on page 6 of the bill. It would be at the very end of section 2. Just inserting a sentence that says that economic growth zone or qualified charity shall have no obligation to repay any distributions received under the act or to make contributions to a fiduciary financial institution. The next amendment relates to page 10. This is section 8. We're talking about the name of the entity. We're just kind of making references to striking trust bank. Just an example, insert fiduciary financial institution. And say if they may use the words, quote, fiduciary financial institution or similar term or phrase, but may not use the word bank, trust company, or any term that tends to imply that they are holding out to the public that they are engaged in the business of banking or engaged in the business of a trust company, unless the commissioner approves that use and finds that it will not be misleading. And then there is then on page 13, the required distribution. This is the same language that was discussed on page 6 about the economic growth zone or qualified charity does not have the obligation to repay any distributions or to make contributions to the financial institution. So that's just the duplicate there to cover both distributions under section 2 and section 11. And then page 18 and section 24. This is the section that establishes the new fund under the Secretary under the Department of Commerce. This would expand the purposes that the fund can be used for, expenditures can be made from. I just say that it would be for purposes of distributing to economic growth zones, for the purposes of economic development projects or opportunities, and then to promote and facilitate expansion and development of trust banks in the state. So it'd be a couple of purposes now that money could be used for in the fund. Page 19. This gets into the pilot program section, section 25 of the bill. We'll just add a new subsection D to just say that this would grant the bank commissioner the opportunity to extend the period in which beneficient could not commence their FIDFIN transactions in the state for a period not to exceed 6 months from the date specified in subsection C. So right now it would be prohibited from taking commencing action until the earlier of December 31 or the date that commissioner adopts rules and regs, which would likely be December 31. This could allow then extension from December 31 for up to 6 months. So you're talking kind of June 30 of 2022. If the commissioner does then have to submit a report to both this committee, Financial Institutions Insurance Committee, and the House Financial Institutions and Rural Development Committee, identifying the specific reasons for which the extension was necessary. The report would have to be filed on or before January 10th, 2022, or the first day of the session next year. And then let's say, notwithstanding the provisions of this subsection, beneficient may satisfy the applicable distribution requirements of Section 2 and Section 11 by placing the assets in escrow with one or more qualified charities, provided that such fund would be released when beneficient is permitted to commence operations. Page 20 changes the definition of qualified charities for purposes of the tax credit in Section 28. And then there's it says to provide that such, they still have to be allowable as a deduction pursuant to Section 170 of the Federal Internal Revenue Code, so still have to comply with federal tax law, and provides that the charities have been organized pursuant to a charter promulgated by the Department of Commerce for purposes of making distributions for the benefit of an economic growth zone. They have to commit to writing to utilize the entire amount of the distributions, excluding reasonable administrative expenses, exclusively for the benefit of charitable causes in one or more economic growth zones or post-secondary educational institutions. They have to agree to provide an annual report to the Department of Commerce detailing qualified distributions received and the distributions made and any remaining balances at the end of the year. These requirements in subparagraph A shall not apply to a charity, contributions to which are allowed as a deduction pursuant to Section 170 of the Federal Internal Revenue Code, that's committed in writing to utilize the entire amount of qualified charitable distributions, excluding administrative expenses, exclusively for the benefit of the economic zone, growth zone identified in section 25A2, and that is that would be a Harvey County. That growth zone that was identified there specifically in section 25. And then the final amendment on the last page, page 21 of the bill, again concerning the tax credit, the amount of time it'd be carried forward, that could be carried forward, is reduced from 14 years down to 5 years. So it could be carried forward by the entity for up to 5 years. I think that is everything in the balloon, Mr. Chairman. I can stand for any questions.
David, committee, are there any questions on the balloon? As I understand it, this is language that has been negotiated with KBA, Beneficent, and the Department of Commerce. We have a motion to adopt the balloon with Olson. Hildebrand seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Are there any other amendments? Senator Pittman? Please proceed, Senator Pittman.
Thank you. It's a simple amendment. Basically, the proponents have, has to do with where the money goes. And what they've done is they've taken economic growth zones that are already in statute, which is a good way to kind of zone out certain rural communities. Basically meaning that they've used pre-existing statute to define where we might put these monies that are coming to the state as a benefit. They did limit it. The 5,000 people limitation is new in this bill to these economic opportunity zones, or growth zones, and I felt like that was a little bit restrictive, and we're introducing something new. So if we're going to use established growth zones, I thought it would be good to keep it in standard. So this amendment takes that 5,000 cap out, and also takes advantage of the other pre-existing economic zones called port authorities. There's 2 current active ones, one in northeast Kansas, one in southeast Kansas, and introduces those as potential locations if this TEFI really does take off. I'd like to have more opportunity zones that are already established in statutes, and so that's what this does.
Are there questions on the balloon? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. I know there's one in Leavenworth, but where's the other one?
It's, I believe, down in Pittsburgh, in that area, right around the short lines that are down there.
Additional questions, comments on the amendment? None. When you want to move your amendment? Sorry, Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, can you describe, because Leavenworth is a pretty populated area, you're saying that the definition of economic growth zone includes this Port Authority districts in other legislation?
The definition of economic growth zone is in other legislation. Port Authority is a separate kind of definition of economic development areas, and so it's not technically a growth zone per se. It's just another definition of an area that's really focused on a growth zone, economic development zone.
So it's an economic development zone within the county?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Girls.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So by taking the 5,000 out, then we basically open it up to the whole state.
No, I think what we do is we keep, it's still defined as counties. These counties that are listed are all economic growth zones. All it's doing, what we're doing inside this legislation is carving out the people who are the counties that can actually get this. The 5,000 people actually limits it to very, very small communities inside of those counties. And I feel like if this thing really does take off like we want it to, we want to make sure that we're allocating the money as best we can and giving flexibility to those areas. And so I feel like just taking that limitation out would be advantageous to each of these counties. And we have, it doesn't actually open up to the whole state.
So the port authorities, how big are them counties where they're at?
I'm not sure, I don't recall exactly how big those counties are.
They're pretty large, I think.
Pittsburgh County's pretty large, I'm sure.
Okay.
Additional comments or questions on the amendment? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The carry of the amendment, did you discuss this with anybody? Where'd the idea come up from?
Yeah, I discussed it with the proponents. They said they didn't have an issue with it per se.
You say proponents,
Eileen, are you shopping online?
are you talking about?
The initial company that's going to be doing the pilot program,
Okay, they didn't have a problem with that?
they said no. I mean, they said if that's fine by them.
Okay. Additional comments on the amendment? Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the list of counties, there are several small counties, not extremely small, that are not listed. And I understand my friend's amendment and his desire to include basically Leavenworth and Crawford County, which are neither one small counties. I'm struggling with whether to support this when we have other counties such as, and it's not in Senate District 15, Cowley County in south central Kansas. One that is in Senate District 15, Lebec County, for example, are not listed among these. And I realize that we were told these are primarily, pardon me, rural opportunity zone counties, except for having put Harvey County in there because of the gentleman being from that county. Would it be, if I may ask the carrier of the amendment, your intention, or would there be opposition to adding some additional relatively small counties that have a lot of small 5,000 or less communities?
I think it's appropriate. I think this is a statewide initiative, and I think the intent of the makers of the proponents is a noble one. But if this thing really does take off and does make a marketplace, I think there should be lots of opportunity zones, and the list probably should be expanded.
I appreciate the answer, Mr. Chairman, from the maker of the motion on the amendment, and I'm in full agreement. If this does explode like we hope that it can, see potential there. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any amendment prepared, and that might be something for the floor, or you might prefer a conceptual. I don't know, but I just thought I would mention that, Mr. Chairman, at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Certainly would like to do it however the committee wants to do it, but I will tell you that there is anticipation after the pilot program that there would certainly be a trailer bill next year. So I'm wondering if it might not be more appropriate to, after we see how the pilot program has gone, to decide whether it's appropriate to add counties then or not for consideration. For not to do conceptual amendments, certainly would welcome something to the floor, or as I suggested, maybe see how the pilot program goes. Exceptionally well, we could certainly add whatever the committee would like. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur with your thoughts on that, the cleaner we can keep this going in, the better, in my opinion. We've got a pilot program, and I'm sure we'll be reviewing this at a later date.
Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I agree. I like to just keep it like it is. Understand everybody's trying to get their district in. I think that comes down the road. I think that's how we got so many counties in, actually, in it. I think originally there was in the 30s, and then everybody got their county in, and it kind of dilutes what you're trying to do. But I think, let's get this passed, allow it to work for a year, and then come back and take a look how we want to spend the money.
I appreciate those comments. I will say this, This is a program that's meant to benefit. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to benefit all small towns, though that is the intent of the TEFI originators. The TEFI is itself a financial instrument we're hoping to make a marketplace for. Where the money goes is a whole separate discussion. We could redirect the money out of small town, we could redirect it to charitable donations across the whole state if we decide to. What they've done is they've used a growth zone model to define a certain area to call the haves and have-nots. And all this is Port Authority is a growth zone, and we should take a look at how it can benefit. If we have very large amounts of charitable donations that are dedicated, there might be a need to have a bigger county like this that's predefined to take advantage of this, and now is a great time to get this in here.
Additional discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Eileen?
I actually wasn't not shopping. I was looking up a definition for port authorities, and I've got definitions and how they're created. If you would like, I can send those out to the committee. They're rather lengthy, so I'm sure you would not want me to read this all to the committee members, but I'm happy to send it all out if you would like.
Anybody who would like that, Eileen can certainly provide that. Senator Pittman.
I'd like to go ahead and move my amendment.
Second. Senator Hildebrand seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
The noes appear to have it. The noes have it. Any other amendments on Senate Bill 288? Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not really going to necessarily make an amendment, only point out something when they are redoing or putting in, and maybe this does need to be an amendment, but if you'll notice section 1B, page 2, line 5 is a 5 and line 11 is a 5, and I realize that that's just an error so I don't know how to handle it. I'll just point it out to you and let you decide.
We're certainly going to conference. I bet we can either fix it in conference or we can give the reviser latitude to make numerical adjustments. So. Okay, what's the pleasure on the bill? Senator Hildebrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we pass out Senate Bill 288 favorably for passage as amended.
Hildebrand makes a motion. Gossage seconds first. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
was that going to be a substitute Senate Bill 288? Just with all the name changes, I don't know. You want to strike and add?
Would you like for it to be a substitute? Probably be cleaner.
It would look cleaner, but it's up to you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend my motion to pass out Senate substitute for Senate Bill 288 favorably for passage.
Gossage seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senate substitute for Senate Bill 288 is headed to the floor. Committee, that is all we have. I would like to very much thank all of you for your participation and your work this year. Certainly want to thank our revisers and our research people who work very diligently behind the scenes. And Suzanne, great work.